you were there in Southern Sudan, and how did you find yourself in this area of country?
Very much, Pastor Itwa. It's really an honor to...
I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now, Pastor Itwa? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, can you hear him?
Yes, we can.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
So, Ibrahim, go ahead, please.
All right, thank you very much, Pastor Itwa. It's an honor to be on your platform today and featured as a guest. Thank you for the privilege. Well, your question as to how I ended up in Korea, frankly, it took me a while to understand my path, but I was approached to work to set up the integrity unit at the UN Green Climate Fund. And the Green Climate Fund is the financing mechanism of the Paris Agreement on climate change. So my task really has been to set up a safeguarding mechanism for protecting the funds entrusted to the GCF for climate change. So I've developed this since 2016, and my term of office comes to an end next year. So hopefully next year I'm back home.
You're back in Nigeria?
By the grace of God.
In time to run for office?
That's not on my list, sir. I'll be running a poultry in my village.
Are you serious?
If there will be a country.
I'm going if there will be a country, fear not.
We must split. There won't be a country.
There will be a country by God's grace. So
we need people like him to come back and help.
He's coming back. That's why I threw it at him that he must come back and run for office and not just run a poultry. Poultry is tough business, though. I grew up on the poultry farm. So we'll be looking forward to receiving you back in next year. And I'm sure that some other organization will want to snap you up and make use of your capacities. What's your thinking? You've been on the platform severally. You've been a really very, very vocal and very committed member of the platform, if I dare say so. And your contributions have been very, very, very superlative and very insightful. But let me hear from you now that you are a special guest. What is your thinking about Nigeria, the situation in Nigeria, how Nigeria got to where it is, and what are the reasons why? And I know that your family was a little bit involved since 1966, although from a tragic or tragical point of view, you may wish to say a little bit about that. But what's your thinking about Nigeria?
Nigeria is probably one of the countries with the greatest potential for prosperity. Having said that, I think clearly that we appear to be focused on the wrong things. We appear to be building on foundations that are not very strong. When I say that we have some of the greatest potential, I focus that conclusion not only on the things that we traditionally trumpet as Nigeria's greatest resources. So not oil or hydrocarbon, but human resource. I think the world today is in the fourth industrial revolution, and that's driven by technology. It's driven by the digital economy and the circular economy. And I see the potential in Nigerians to capitalize on the benefits of these opportunities. I'm eternally optimistic about our country, not because the signs are very good at the moment, but because I think if you look on the larger plane and you take a longer term view, it is clear that we do have tremendous potential. But at the moment, all is not well.
So what do we do? And how do you think we can rescue Nigeria back from the brink where it seems to be at this point in time? How come after 6 years after independence, we're still we're still in a situation where we're talking about non-achievement of potential?
Well, I think governance question, to be honest. So last week on the platform, and I'm very happy to see Mr. Antonio Gbegbo, we had a conversation on this issue where we were comparing Nigeria's pathways with that of South Korea. The trajectories of both countries have been remarkably different. However, their starting point was the same. So if I do a comparison, what I think we are grappling with is just the political will, the courage, and the ability to govern our political economy to deliver on the promises of democracy. So we have challenges in building an economy that would be that would be strong enough to cater for the aspirations of Nigerians. But we're not taking advantage of them. Our biggest opportunities are probably the ones that we pay the least attention to. And that really is the crux of the matter. If we're able to get our economy working properly, then we would be able to achieve prosperity. But at the moment, I think a lot of the focus is on politics, on the things that divide us rather than the things that could prosper us. So, yeah, I think if we get our governance right, then we would be on the path to prosperity. But on the subject that we speak to today, I think going back, that is the fundamental issue. If national reconciliation, for me, is the best pathway towards peace and progress. And when we talk about national reconciliation, we're talking about creating the environment for safety and security of Nigerians, establishing truth and justice as the anchors of our democratic, of our democracy. And then we can build on sort of the things that help us to aspire to greatness. But without national reconciliation, we keep floundering and we keep going back to the starting point.
What would you mean exactly by national reconciliation? What do you precisely have in mind? Who is being reconciled, and what sort of process would you be advising that we go through?
So national reconciliation essentially rests on two pillars, as I've said. And those two pillars are truth and justice. I think if we look at the examples of Latin American countries and Eastern Europe, countries that emerge out of situations of conflict or situations of authoritarian rule often come with major historical experiences of human rights abuses, of mass violations. Now, what that does is that it undermines the aspirations towards democracy. You need to reestablish truth and justice in order to be able to create national harmony. Why is that important? Well, it's important because unless people feel that they are able to be governed by a system of laws and due process, you will often find resorts to conflict. And whenever there is conflict, of course, then you find that there is no opportunity for economic growth. That's the experience we have had in Nigeria. That's the experience that they had in Latin America and in Europe. So let me give you an example, Pastor Ifa. In Chile, they had a president called Pinochet. Pinochet was in power for over 3 decades. And during that time, there were mass abuses of human rights. He was a dictator. And remember, this is the time of the Cold War, where you were either on the side of one of the two global superpowers. And countries that tended towards dictatorship adopted that sort of Soviet style, that kind of Soviet style ideology. Now, in Chile, when eventually Pinochet was taken out of power, what you were left with was a country that had been devastated by the brutal rule of a dictator. And they then had to embark on a process of reconciliation. And the only way that they could do that was through establishing a transitional justice mechanism. And what did that involve? That involved truth-telling. It involved establishing truth commissions. It involved having restorative justice mechanisms. And it involved creating, affording reparation to people who had been injured by these brutal abuses. Now, again, you can see the situation as well in Argentina. This the same sort of situation. And you had a prosecutor in Argentina called Luis Moreno Ocampo. And he was given the task to prosecute the military generals who, for some of the grievous offenses. One of the examples is that they would fly opposition politicians or activists in helicopters handcuffed, and while the helicopter was over the sea, they would, just throw them overboard. There were brutal killings during that period, and you had after that the mothers of Argentina who were campaigning to find their disappeared children. Now, in that context, you cannot begin to talk about progress in a country until you have addressed some of these issues. And in addressing them, you heal the land, you heal the people, not only in a physical sense, but also, I think, in a spiritual and a moral sense, so that the country has direction and it has the opportunity to grow to its full potential. And so when Ocampo finished this, in fact, he did such a good job that he was then appointed the first prosecutor of the International Criminal Court. Now, if you transpose this to Nigeria, you would see that we have had similar experiences. And I can speak more to the context of Nigeria, especially from the lens of the work that was done on the Oputa panel, for example. I worked with the Oputa panel as a special legal assistant, so I was privileged to have a front row seat and to benefit tremendously from the wisdom of Justice Oputa and the other commissioners. And one of the things he said, which, and by the way, I'll talk a bit about where that Oputa report is now, and the opportunities that exist for exploiting what was contained in that report. Gani Farmi, I think, described it in a very interesting way when he said that, I will give you that quotation in a minute, but that the Oputa panel was very well structured and it delivered on a very important mission. But so dealing with systematic or massive abuses requires a distinctive approach, an approach that is both backward and forward-looking. And transitional justice measures aim not only to dignify victims, but also to prevent similar victimhood in the future. The long-term goals of transitional justice measures are to promote peace, democracy, and reconciliation, with the idea that these conditions help to prevent systematic or massive violations of human rights. Now, what Justice Oputa explained very succinctly and with great jurisprudential depth in the report of the panel, he says, and let me quote him, he says, "To forgive and to reconcile is not necessarily to deny justice. We should not confuse or conflate justice with prosecution and with criminal or retributive justice. Viewed in the broader perspective of legal theory or jurisprudence, as well as the moral and political philosophy, reconciliation represents not the antithesis, but the triumph of justice. Now, in simple terms, what Justice Oputa was saying is that the aim of looking back and reviewing what has happened in the past is in order to ensure that we reconcile. And when we reconcile, we're then able to set ourselves on a path of growth and progress. Now, traditionally, we would think that reconciliation is not a matter that is high on the list of priorities. After all, you want to fight corruption, you want to spur the economy, you want to create jobs, etc., etc. But I think it's important to take a strategic look at what needs to come first before you can build on the foundations of progress. And that's why, given the history of Nigeria, going back, I think, essentially with the Oputa panel terms of reference, going back to January 1966, we're able to review all of the things that went wrong from that point in order to correct them, to address them, and to create the environment for people to deal with the past and therefore be able to walk forward into the future. I think Nigeria at this point is dangerously off kilter, and we need to restore balance in our political and social system. But how did we lose this balance? I think it's by not addressing accumulated grievances. I mean, everywhere in Nigeria, in every part of the country, you hear people talk about marginalization, about exclusion from resources, about the need to exercise greater autonomy over their own affairs. All of this traces back to the fact that several different groups of Nigerians either feel that they have been treated unjustly, or they feel that they have been in some way been the victims of repressive rule or authoritarianism. Now, you've got to address this in order to create that spirit of nationhood that you need to be able to take the country forward. I mean, even in interpersonal relationships, if there are accumulated grievances, say between husband and wife, etc., it would get to a point when, that kind of situation leads to bitterness. So everything that you see is colored by what your prejudices are. So the problem is either the Fulani herdsmen, or it is the Niger Delta militants, or it is the militants in the North Central, or it's the people in the Northeast, or it's there is always that lens with which we look at ourselves and our problems is colored by the fact that we have not addressed a number of issues in our past. I would like to speak about the role of the Oputa panel in order to give a little bit of context to some of the theoretical matters that I've been talking about. Now, the Oputa panel was probably the first initiative set up by the government, the administration of President Obasanjo in 1999. And what he did then was he recognized that in order to go forward, we had to look back and solve a number of problems. Initially, he set the terms of reference from 1994 to 1999. In other words, just the period when General Sani Abacha and General Abdulsalami Abubakar were heads of state. However, the panel then came back and asked for an extension. And I think there was popular agitation as well to go back to 1966, because that was the point at which our democracy was truncated, the military came into power, and then we experienced the ravages of authoritarian rule. So that was done. the extension was granted, and the panel worked for 3 years from 1999 to 2002. Now, a number of the things that the panel set out to do included the following: to reveal the truth, to acknowledge harm that was done, to encourage perpetrators to show remorse for the pain suffered by victims, apologize for wrongdoings, hold perpetrators accountable, heal the injuries that have been caused, and rehabilitate people with disabilities, etc., and to ensure forgiveness and closure by victims in order to prevent future occurrences and also establish institutional reforms. Now, I have here a quotation from The Guardian in its editorial in December 2004, where it said, "No doubt the Oputa panel generated perhaps more public interest than any other issue since the advent of this government. It is in fact intended as a cardinal offer of government to move the country out of the doldrums. Nigerians accepted it as such. The people have a right to know the outcome of the Oputa panel. Denying them that right is like taking them for a ride. And it is capable of breeding deep mistrust of future government actions and policies." Now, anyone who was in Nigeria at the time would remember how you were glued to your TV set every evening to see what had happened at the Oputa panel during the course of that day. And the reason for that attraction and attention is because it was important to see, to see, first of all, and understand the truth about the abuses that had happened, but also to see potentially the perpetrators come before the panel and be questioned about what happened and to admit their wrongdoing, but also to see victims who would stand also in front of the panel and engage in an act of reconciliation or forgiveness. I will speak about a couple of the cases that came to the panel, which were some of the most gripping and some of the most memorable. And then look at possibly, are there opportunities or learnings that we could look at to further exploit what was offered by the Oputa panel. Pastor, let me speak about the case of a journalist. His name was Bagauda Kaltho. He was a journalist with the magazine The News. He was based in Kaduna. Bagauda Kaltho wrote about the events surrounding the coup that was alleged to have been planned by General Obasanjo and General Eradua. Apparently, that news article didn't go down very well with the government of the day. And so when Bagauda went home to Gombe State in Billiri for the Christmas in 1995, he informed his brother and he said, "Look, I think government is after me, and I'm worried for my life in case they would want to harm me." After Christmas, he left Billiri and was returning to Kaduna, and he informed his wife that he'd be back home within a month. He never arrived in Kaduna, and his family didn't hear word of him. So they started to find out what had happened, and eventually they got wind that he may have been arrested. And they were directed to go to the CID in Alagbon Close. Now, at the CID, there was a gentleman called Assistant Commissioner of Police, Zachary Bew. And when they met this gentleman, he said that, in fact, he had just received the file concerning Bagauda Kaltho, this journalist, and that the file came from the presidency in Abuja, and that if they cooperated with him, shortly Bagauda will be released. Now, he said if they didn't cooperate with him, they may never see their brother or their father again. After that meeting, when they were heading back to their home, there was a news item which said that this journalist, Bagauda Kalto, was killed in a bomb blast at Double Hotel in Kaduna. And there were pictures of a mangled body in that hotel. Well, not mangled, but a dead body. And they were shocked because clearly this was going on a year or two after the disappearance of Mr. Kauto. And they had just left the police where they were told that the man would be released soon. I wouldn't go into all of the detail, but there was a lot of contradictory evidence from the SSS, from the police in Kaduna, and it was unclear who this gentleman was and how he was killed in a bomb blast. But one thing was certain, that this was not the corpse of Bagauda Kauto. Now, the panel tried to find, through its investigative means, what could have happened. But interestingly, what transpired immediately after this killing was that ACP Zachary Biu was sent from Lagos to take over the investigation in Kaduna. And the Inspector General of Police at the time, according to the testimony of Major Hamza Al-Mustafa, who was Chief Security Officer to the President, to the Head of State, the Inspector General at the time actually went to the Head of State and presented the picture of this journalist, Bagauda Kauto, as the bomber who died in Double Hotel in Kaduna. Now, everything indicates that this was a cover-up, and that gentleman was killed or was disappeared because no corpse has yet been found. And until today, his whereabouts are unknown. And what the panel recommended was that this case needed to be reinvestigated and that a special investigation panel needed to be set up. Now, we'll talk about what happened to the recommendations of the panel in a little bit. But let me also talk about one of the most profound petitions that came to Oputa panel. This was the petition relating to the Asaba massacre. A gentleman called Dr. Uriah came to the hearings in Enugu. That petition was brought by an accomplished lawyer, also of Asaba lineage, and his name is Chuck Ndukaeze. Now, when Dr. Uriah came to testify at the panel, he spoke about how in October 1967, when federal troops entered Asaba, the men of the town gathered together to welcome the troops. At some point, these men were rounded up. Dr. Uriah at the time was 7 years old. They were herded into the town square. For those who know Asaba, it's called Ogbesowa. I'm not sure I pronounced it correctly. And without further warning or fanfare, they were set upon by the soldiers, and gunfire was rained upon them. The soldiers opened fire from different positions. At the end of which, estimates are that between 700 and 1,000 men, including some children, were killed. Dr. Uriah survived that experience, possibly because of his small nature. He fell under the bodies of men who had been shot to death. And later at night, he managed to crawl out and he was able to leave. He gave a really chilling account on that day. But one of the most chilling things that he did say was that he had, from the age of 7, been unable to speak about this event until that day in Enugu in 2000. And that he had every night he had nightmares about that event. But that day he believed he would sleep well for the first time because he had finally managed to speak about it. Now, currently, Chuck is creating with colleagues under the with the help of the Asaba of Asaba, they're setting up a memorial for the victims of the killings in Asaba. And I think this is really important work to memorialize the event. But I raise this because it is symbolic of a number of episodes, not only during the war, but even after. And I can point to a number of incidences like this. It happened in Umuechem in Rivers State, where a couple hundred people were killed protesting the exploitation by Shell, the oil company. We can point to Bakalori, where there was a dam that was being built in the 80s. And the people protested because that dam was going to affect their water sources. And they were set upon by Nigerian security forces. A number of them were killed. We know what happened in Plateau State in the course of the early 2000s and how at the time, and I'll just mention one thing, that at that time in Plateau, I was at the International Criminal Court from 2005. And one of the things that struck me was that when we were considering doing the analysis of crimes in different parts of the world, the incidences in Plateau State had more confirmed killings than we were finding in Iraq. And that made me quite disturbed, because while Iraq hugged all the global headlines, what was going on in Plateau, which was by far worse, did not have the same level of global attention. However, I understand that that at the time, and you know, I defer to a number of people here who by far my senior, my brother Yusuf Pam, who was Attorney General in Plateau at the time, and my older sister, who headed the panel that I believe the panel that investigated the killings in Plateau, the Honorable Justice Jummai Sankey. And eventually, by the way, my mother was headed the reconciliation panel as well. But what was going on at that time in Plateau State had all the markings of a grievous violation of human rights and killings that were of an order of magnitude that rivaled what we saw in Iraq and even overshadowed some of what we were seeing in Darfur and other places. Now, when you look at all of these incidences, one thing is clear, that there's a thread that runs through all of them. And that is the fact that you have a situation where there are mass violations which bring about grave, serious grievances. And at the end of it, life just seems to move on. And we don't seem to come back and account, hold people responsible, soothe victims, provide reparation, create repairs. Nothing of that seems to happen. I mean, if we look at the context of the Nigerian Civil War, the figures indicate that about 3 million people died in the course of the war. Now, if you think about that, that is in the order of, you know, the Korean War, for example, where maybe 1.5 or 2 million people were killed. Now, what efforts have been made since then? I acknowledge there was the 3 R's, the reconciliation, reconstruction, and forgive me, I forget the 3rd R. And that program was successful to an extent in rebuilding and reconstructing the areas that were devastated in the Southeast. But, you know, the people who suffered these great tragedies arguably were never recompensed, and they didn't have an avenue to speak about what had happened to them. There was no opportunity to reflect and there was no point where there was a reckoning. And that's the danger, because what happens is that you might subdue the first generation just by the fact that they have been conquered in war. But what will happen in the end is that the generations that come after will ask questions. You know, it's like the Chinese movies we used to go and see as kids. And the storyline usually was, you know, you kill my father, I kill your father, and then my child kills your grandfather. And it's just a cycle of violence that ensues, and it never comes to an end. How do we bring this cycle of violence to an end? When today we look at some of the hatred and some of the bitterness that comes out of different parts of the country, it is rooted in the fact that certain grievances have not been addressed. And the Oputa panel presented an opportunity for us to address them. And I propose that it's possible to still take advantage. But let me just speak on a couple others, and then I would conclude. So take, for example, the petitions that came to the Oputa panel. There were about 10,000 petitions overall. 8,000 of these 10,000 came from Ogoni, the Ogoni people. The situation in Ogoni land, as you remember, was quite dire. The panel faced the challenge of dealing with an agitation by Ogoni people against the excesses of the oil company Royal Dutch Shell. Now, the circumstances were such that when the Ogoni were agitating against Shell, it got to a point where the agitations turned violent, and Shell was literally expelled out of Ogoni land. This created a drop in oil revenues. And of course, government was hugely concerned about that. Now, ordinarily, if we were in a democracy, government would seek to address the issues that created the agitation. But being in a military government, what then happened was that government applied a means of repression. And so an internal security task force under Major Okuntimo came in. Now, by the way, the Ogoni had the issues with their neighbors, the Andoni. There was a war going on. Hundreds of people were getting killed. And so there was a need for some sort of security intervention. I absolutely recognize that. But then what then happened was that the agitations between the Ogoni exacerbated. So Ken Saro-Wiwa, who was the president of MOSOP, exercised great influence over the youth. And the youth formed themselves into a vanguard, which had become quite militant. Now, the rhetoric of Mr. Saro-Wiwa as president of MOSOP was such that it cast some of the Ogoni leaders, some of the chiefs, as vultures. And the youth understood that to mean that, you know, if you look at the Stanton model, the 8-stage Stanton model of genocide, you would see one of the stages is classification. And once you classify or you demonize a group, then you open them up for attack. So the youth then pounced upon these chiefs, Chief Edward Kobani, Chief Samuel Orage, Theophilus Orage, and Mr. Albert Badi. And they killed them. They killed them in a very brutal fashion. And with the Oputa panel, we were able to go to that venue and to see some of the locus in quo and to get evidence on the things that had happened. One of them was burnt inside his Volkswagen Beetle car. Another one, according to the police, after he had been killed, his body was burnt, and there was some acts of cannibalism, according to the police. Now, once this gruesome event had happened, Ken Saro-Wiwa and 8 others were arrested and charged with murder. Now, bear in mind, Ken was not even in the vicinity at the time. But they were charged with murder, not brought before the regular courts, but a special tribunal was created to charge them, to prosecute them under Justice Ibrahim James. Now, that special tribunal, of course, did not carry all of the due process safeguards of the judicial system. And there were a number of failings in the process. In fact, so much so that Ken's lawyer, Chief Gani Fawehinmi, actually withdrew himself from the proceedings. In the end, Ken Saro-Wiwa and 8 others were sentenced to death by hanging for the murders. And eventually they were executed without being granted the opportunity to appeal. Now, when these 9 Ogonis were executed, as you know, both internally and outside Nigeria, the reaction and the responses were quite virulent. Nigeria was suspended from the Commonwealth. All kinds of measures were placed against the country and against its leaders. And internally, of course, the situation was combustible. Now, what the panel did, what the Oputa panel did, was to speak to both sides of the divide. And very interestingly, when we went to Port Harcourt for the public hearings, and you can imagine that there was a lot of tension in the room, given that this was a highly flammable issue. When we sat in that room during those hearings, something that struck me very deeply was what was said by one of the widows of the Ogoni 4 chiefs. I believe it was Mrs. Kobani. I'm not quite sure. I might be mistaken. But she talked about how Ken Saro-Wiwa had lived with them for some time, how her husband was his uncle. And she said, "Ken, you ate my food and you broke my pot." It was such a profound expression. It was giving vent to the bitterness and the hurt and the pain that she had carried all of those years. That while the world focused on Ken Saro-Wiwa, there was no attention at all paid to the suffering and the pain that the Ogoni 4 chiefs' families had been put through. But anyway, that whole hearing got to the point where Justice Oputa, in his wisdom, described not the Ogoni 9 or the Ogoni 4, but suggested that we refer to them as the Ogoni 13. Now, this created a new paradigm. This was talking about unity and talking about reconciliation and trying to bury the hatchet, as it were. And after visits to both the families of Ken, we met with his father, Pa Saro-Wiwa, and also went to the home of one of the chiefs who was killed. There was an opportunity right there to create the basis for some sort of reconciliation among the Ogonis. And then Father Kuka, now Bishop Kuka, who was a member of the Oputa panel, subsequently was given a role in cementing this reconciliation amongst the Ogonis. It's not settled. You don't settle it by fiat, but a long way has gone in sort of bringing the parties together, creating the opportunity for peace and reconciliation among the Ogoni. The last one I want to speak about is Dele Giwa, if I have a few minutes.
Please go ahead.
Now, Dele Giwa, as many of you would remember, was a very reputable journalist. On the 19th of October, 1986, Dele Giwa was having breakfast with his colleague Kayode Soyinka at his home in Ikeja. And he received a parcel which was brought into his his living room, his dining room. And that parcel had was titled "From the C&C." As you know, in Nigeria, C&C means Commander-in-Chief. And it was marked secret and confidential. Apparently, 2 men had dropped it off, and according to some of the accounts, they came on a motorcycle. Deligua received that parcel and said to his friend Kayode Soyinka, this is from the president. He placed the parcel on his laps, and as he proceeded to open it, it exploded. And that parcel exploding on his laps created grievous injuries for him. Unfortunately, Kayode Soyinka, who was opposite him, the table and other obstructions sort of deflected the blast from hurting him too much. Now, as you know, Deligua did not survive that bomb blast. He died not long after. And we all remember those photographs, seeing the photographs of his mangled body after he was killed. Now, Gani Fahimi being his lawyer and having already been warned by Deligua that there had been threats to his life, took up this challenge to find the killers of Deligua. And he did this very doggedly for a number of years. But it took all of 15 years between the killing and the setting up of the Oputa panel. And those of you who are lawyers remember all of the attempts by Gani Fahimi to institute private prosecution. Now, at the Oputa panel, this was listed for public hearing, firstly in Lagos and then subsequently in Abuja. And when Gani appeared, unfortunately, the anticlimax was that the people who ought to have been on the other side, including a former president and some top military officers, did not appear in court, in the tribunal. The respondents then approached the courts. They appeared at the tribunal represented by their lawyers, but they didn't appear. And they subsequently filed actions in court, and they received they were issued with injunctions to restrain the tribunal from inviting them. And subsequently, the case progressed to the point where the Supreme Court, and I will just mention this because it's important in the end, but the Supreme Court, and this is why the Oputa panel report was not released by government. The Supreme Court said that the Tribunals of Inquiry Act 1966, which is the statutory instrument that set up the Oputa panel, had application only in the FCT because it was a matter that was on the concurrent list and could be legislated by states. So the lawyers understand this to mean that by this, the effect of this of judgment by the Supreme Court was that the activities of the Oputa panel outside of the FCT in Abuja were not backed by law. And this created a real situation for the implementation of the panel's report. But what it effectively did was that it shielded the governors, the former president, from appearing before the panel and from being questioned as to a number of issues that were brought before them. Of course, you recall that President Obasanjo, who was then incumbent, did appear before the panel, as did a number of senior retired generals, but these prominent former heads of state did not appear. But the Commission's report, however, did not shirk its responsibility in identifying exactly who had been indicated as the perpetrators. So let me just say, quote exactly what the report said in its conclusion. It said, on General Ibrahim Babangida, we are of the view that there is evidence to suggest that he and the 2 security chiefs, Brigadier General Halilu Akilu and Colonel A.K. Togun, are accountable for the untimely death of Deligua by a letter bomb. we recommend that this case be reopened for further investigation in the public interest. This was the conclusion in the report of the panel. Now, nothing could be more profound in terms of indicating accountability or responsibility for this grievous event. And this is on the public record in the report of the panel. Now, I talked about the Supreme Court ruling and how the panel report has now been archived. Well, when he received the report, President Obasanjo in May 2002, this is what he said. He said, "We will, with maximum dispatch and all seriousness, look clinically into the report. We need to be remorseful and sorry for our past misdeeds as a people, and as a people resolve never to allow it happen again." This is what the president indicated he was going to do. However, shortly after, when the Supreme Court delivered this, this judgment that I spoke about, the Attorney General of the Federation at the time and Minister of Justice, Chief Akilolu Olujimi, he said, government decided not to release the report in deference to the Supreme Court judgment delivered on 31st of January, 2003. And that basically the court's judgment was that the 1999 Constitution made no provision for tribunals of inquiry, as did the 1963 Constitution. Releasing the report will not make any meaning because it cannot be enforced. That was the Attorney General, and that's why the report was kept in archives. However, Femi Falana, now SAN, had a very interesting challenge to this conclusion that the report of the Oputa panel cannot be enforced. And the reason I say this is because we must understand, and I will quote again from Oputa, the late Justice Oputa. You must understand that that panel report still exists. It is not a document that has lapsed. It is still a live document. It is archived. And therefore, the status as to whether or not it can be, the recommendations can be enforced is a live issue. Well, Femi Falana says he does not agree that the report cannot be enforced. He argues that the decision of the Supreme Court did not annul the report of the commission, but only in effect invalidated the activities of the commission outside of the Federal Capital Territory. You know, even then, The Guardian in its editorial said that although the decision was supposedly, this Supreme Court decision, was supposedly predicated on a judgment of the Supreme Court, the decision by the Attorney General, to the effect that the law under which the commission was set up had no support under the 1999 Constitution. We believe it is a travesty of justice for government to have reached the conclusion that it did, in other words, to withhold the report. The casual and controversial manner in which the federal government has handled the matter is condemnable. This is one case where the court may be legally right, and yet it did not do justice. The court may be legally right, but it did not do justice. Now, Justice Oputa said, and you know, when we talk about whether or not the report is still alive, here's how he put it in chapter 1 of the report. He says, "We therefore hope that the report will offer a credible perspective on our past, while also serving as a roadmap for our future. We do not claim that we have said all there is to be said about our past and our future. Much perhaps remains to be said and will be said by present and future chroniclers. This is as it should be, if only because history is forever unfolding itself. As new evidence arises, as new interpretations confront old ones, and as the ineluctable march of science bring forth new tools for unscrambling the past." So what Justice Oputa is saying is, we have a record, we have a credible record It may not address all of the issues, but it provides a basis on which we can further advance the chronicling of our history. And Chief Gawing me the quotation that I was looking for earlier, what he said was, the commission was so thorough, so profound, so well conducted, so conclusive, and so painstaking that it probably had no rival in the country's history. Let me pay tribute to President Obasanjo on this point, because what happened when he received the commission's report in May 2002 was that he immediately announced the constitution of an implementation panel to implement the recommendations of the Oputa panel. And in fact, that panel was to be chaired by, incidentally, my mother, Mrs. Elizabeth Pam. However, that panel never was able to function because of the circumstances of this Supreme Court ruling. And that's where Father Kuka said at that time, nothing stops the government from releasing the report to the Nigerian public as a moral obligation. Releasing the report would not have and will not solve our problems. It will not put bread on the table, but it would have helped to establish confidence that the government is sincere about seeking a way out of the problems of Nigeria. I know I've taken a lot of time, Pastor Ito. I would have liked to make a couple more comments in order to tie all of this historical review into our contemporary issues. Maybe if I had 5 minutes, I could do that.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Pastor Ito. So again, as we reflect on how these past events affect how we proceed into the future, let me just highlight, forgive me, permit me to go slightly personal, and the reason will be clear when I finish. In January 1966, I was 4 months old when 2 truckloads of soldiers arrived at our house in Ikoyi and shut down came shooting through the kitchen door and forcibly abducted my father, James Pam. He was then a lieutenant colonel and he was the adjutant general of the Nigerian army. He was aged 33 years. And these soldiers were under the command of his deputy adjutant general, Major Humphrey Chukwuka, as well as Second Lieutenant Godwin Oyefuru and Sergeant Donatus Anyanwu. Major Chukwuka was a regular guest to our home, and so my mother knew him quite well. And when she asked him what was going on, he assured her that nothing would happen and he would bring her husband back shortly. Now, not long after they left, having shot the tires of my father's car, and in fact threatened the whole family with their weapons, they were confronted by Major Christian Anuforo, who was also one of the authors of the coup of that morning. And Major Anuforo proceeded to execute my father. The account is that he shot him with a submachine gun. The autopsy report showed that he was struck with 13 bullets and killed almost instantly. His body, along with the bodies of others who were killed on that morning, were dumped in shallow graves on the road to Abeokuta. And subsequently, after the coup had been put down, supposedly, the bodies were retrieved, taken to the army hospital in Yaba, and subsequently buried. Now, 55 years on, we're still looking for the place of burial where my father was buried. And we have no information on it. Hopefully we will find it so that we can honor him with a proper burial. Otherwise, perhaps our children after us will continue the search. But after these gruesome events and the killings of so many political leaders and military leaders in January 1966, there was a counter coup in July. The reason for that counter coup and the revenge, because it was tagged a revenge coup, is that nothing had been done to bring to justice the perpetrators of the coup in January 1966. Now, as I said, and you would recall, justice is at the center of national harmony and reconciliation. So what then happened in July 1966, on the 29th of July, and for 2 or 3 days thereafter, was an orgy of killings. In Oputa, for example, and some of these are too gruesome to talk about in a public forum, but the reports exist. In Oputa, for example, soldiers, mainly of northern extraction, brought together as many southeastern officers and soldiers as they could find, and they executed them in the hall, the assembly hall, by various means. Some of the coup plotters of January 1966 were taken from the places where they were held in custody, and they were executed, some by the most grievous means. Again, something that, I would not speak about in detail in a public forum. Now, what then derived from this event was that the Southeasterners, especially those living in the North, came under attack and became quite vulnerable. And as they sought to go back to the East for their safety, the records indicate that nearly 30,000 were killed. Now, Nigeria is sometimes operates on a scale at which is difficult to grasp. If you're thinking about 30,000 people being killed, it sometimes challenges your imagination to think how this could happen. But of course, we saw it happen in Rwanda in more recent. And as they retreated back to the East with loss of property, loss of limbs, loss of lives, etc., the stage was set for the Civil War. Perhaps, if at the crucial moment there had been an intervention in truth and in justice, perhaps we could have saved ourselves what came thereafter, which was this massive loss of life on a scale that at that time had never been seen on the African continent. So the impact of all of these historical issues, they begin to mirror what we see today. I mean, and if you think about it, and I worry that we are the last generation that has an opportunity to engage in these difficult conversations and hold ourselves up and our country up to account, in the hope that we can achieve an understanding of the past and build reconciliation in order to resolve the issues. I fear that the next generation is left only with the emotions and the prejudices and does not have an understanding of the facts and the context. And when I engage with younger people, they honestly, truly do not appreciate the history of Nigeria. But they have these very strongly held prejudices and emotions, which sometimes we, who ought to know better, are guilty of feeding. So everything is cast in an ethnic or tribal rivalry. It's either the fault of the Fulani herdsmen, or it's the fault of the Igbo people who want to take over Nigeria, or it's the fault of the Yorubas who have taken all the money. Our frame of reference is so corrupted that we are unable to appreciate objectively where some of these scabs and scars of abuses have come about. So it's our challenge to ensure that we avoid a retreat to the past. And we're starting to see that. And I truly worry about this, because if we do not correct our course, we will continue to perpetuate this cycle of abuse and grievance. And without a proper means of reconciliation, we will, God forbid it, end up in a situation where the outcomes are just as bad as they were 55 years ago. We may never be able to come to agreement about our past. Our histories will always be contested, and even all the stories that we tell. But we can agree to make our future better than our past. And we can agree to live our present determined not to make the same mistakes of the past. Bishop Desmond Tutu said with the South African Truth Commission, he said, the past is another country. The way its stories are told and the way they are heard change as the years go by. The spotlight gyrates, exposing old lies and illuminating new truths. As a fuller picture emerges, a new piece of the jigsaw of our past settles into place. So gradually, we find that history itself begins to shift and to change according to our perspectives, according to our prejudices. And the story is told and retold, and it takes on new dimensions. How do we want the story of Nigeria to be told? That's our challenge. But let me leave you with this thought. Nigeria needs its moment of catharsis. We need to undergo a rite of passage for the harm and destruction that we have suffered at a personal and national level. And I think, Pastor Istwa, you would appreciate this not only on a material level, but also from a deeply spiritual level. That unless we're able to heal our land and atone for all of what has happened, it will be difficult to take the next steps forward with confidence. So make no mistake, prosperity follows peace and security. So long as we do not have national reconciliation and peace, prosperity and progress may continue to elude us. Reconciliation based on truth, knowledge, and forgiveness is indeed the triumph of justice. Thank you, Pastor Ito.
Thank you very much, Ibrahim. Thank you. And thank you. And thank you again. You have really spoken very well, very deep, and really straight from the heart. And I do hope or wish that a lot of our leaders are listening and would find a way to make sure that they hear and they listen. Because I think you really caught to the root of the matter of a lot of things that have been sort of buried and almost forgotten about in our country, Nigeria. I have a few questions to ask. For example, what can we now do about this Oputa panel report? And do we now start making our way to starting another reconciliation, truth and reconciliation panel? And Obasanjo, having put in all that energy and effort working with Oputa, suddenly then allowed this whole effort to almost not come to any kind of fruition. What could he have done and what should we have done? I think you did say that it could have been something even just for our own moral obligation, but what could we have done? And then it speaks to this issue of gatekeepers in Nigeria, a few untouchables who will not allow Nigeria to heal. What do you think? we can do concerning the Oputa report? And how do you think we can take it a step further and genuinely bring healing? Incidentally, Chalk is my very good friend, and I know about this Asaba massacre monument that he's so passionate about. In fact, I think I read a write-up by you. I was wondering what the connection was, but now I know it because Chalk also got me to write a few things about that. So what do we do to that? I'll have you speak to that for a few minutes, and then I'll take some comments or questions from my brother, Mr. Ayo Eroche, Sonia Nebi, Pastor Sam, and Anthony, after you've made these comments.
Thank you, Pastor Ita. I tend to limit myself to an analytical role, but you put me on the spot. The Oputa panel, like I said, is alive. The report of the panel is alive. Because the findings and the recommendations are still unchanged. Now, I wouldn't be naive about this. There are vested interests, and I listened with great interest to the TED talk by His Royal Highness, the former Emir of Kano. And he talked about vested interests in Nigeria and how deep they are. It is clear to me and to many of us that it would take a lot, and it probably would take the passage of time before we are able to fully implement the report of the panel. As I've said, you heard some of the names that came out of the report. There are very strong interests. And let me pay tribute to civil society, because it is by the efforts of civil society that the report itself is now available on the internet. Because, it is my guess that it would never have seen the light of day. What do we do? I think we need to constantly enlighten ourselves about what opportunities exist. Now, sometimes civil society stops short of giving full effect to the powers that it has in order to advocate and to bring about real change. I would love to see a strong demand for the implementation of the Oputa panel. Whether it would happen in this dispensation or not, I do not know. But I think that unless we are able to resuscitate it and address it, I know some bits are being done. And I know there are a number of people waiting to ask questions, but I'll just say this. So you see, recently, I think a couple of years ago, when June 12th was designated Democracy Day, there was a posthumous award to Chief MKO Abiola. And by the way, I didn't mention the petition regarding the killing of Chief MKO Abiola. I think that I would leave you to read that in the panel report. It's extremely enlightening. And you would see the accountabilities that are set out there. So you had that was part of the recommendations of the panel. And these things are being done in piecemeal. There are a number of things that have been done. But unless you bring out that report and you implement it, you would not get the full benefit of the work that was done. The only thing I can say, honestly, Pastor Itwa, is that the panel report needs to see the light of day again and to be implemented.
Thank you very much, Ibrahim. I think at this point in time, for the first time on this forum, we'll have a minute in silence, first of all, for Ibrahim's dad and all the victims of the various atrocities in Nigeria over the last maybe 100 years, to be honest, because a lot of people even lost their lives and their livelihood in the fight for democracy and independence itself. So can we just have a minute in silence in appreciation in reverence of the great sacrifices that quite a lot of people and their families have made for this entity called Nigeria. May the souls of all the faithful departed find peace, truly find peace in the Almighty Creator. And may the families be truly comforted, strengthened, reassured, restored, even at this time. May Nigeria itself be comforted and reassured. This is the voice of the children of Rachel crying, even in the wilderness and from the womb. May God comfort his creation, and may he bring peace and progress in our land and make Nigeria great again. Amen. Ibrahim, thank you very much again. And of course, my heart goes out to you, to the family of whom I'm very, very close, especially with your elder brother Yusuf. But let's take a few questions at this time. Uncle Ayo, Sonny Enebi, Pastor Sam, and Anthony Ugo, can you please ask your questions one after the other like that? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pastor Itwa Igodalo. I must say that I very much appreciate you having brought someone like Mr. Pam on this forum. It's a remarkable difference from bringing some of those people who say they are governors of some state come to talk to us on this kind of thing. These are not the kind of things we want to hear. Today in Nigeria, a lot of people are hurting. Nigerians are hurting a lot. And you could hear it from the voice of somebody like Mr. Pam. Mr. Pam, my tremendous sympathies. Fortunately, somehow along the line, I remember my father having spoken about your late dad, because my father was also at the base ordnance depot on Clifford Street then, Nigerian Army. Now, if I will come back to this topic, I'm just going to ask Mr. Pam, was the Oputa panel not fashioned from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of South Africa, raised by Nelson Mandela? Was the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of South Africa, was it embedded in the Constitution of South Africa? Because, I mean, there was no rules, there was no rule and cry about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of South Africa. So why should that of Nigeria be a different one? I think when that commission was set up by President Obasanjo, a lot of Nigerians were excited because a lot of people were hurting. Even the Igbos, the South Easterners, after the war, were still hurting. Even some people in the North were still hurting, whose parents, like Mr. Pam's father, were killed, were all hurting. The Agri-Rosis were hurting. So it was a whole lot of things. Like you said, the Ogoni people were also hurting. So it's so sad that such a report could be swept under the carpet after so much effort, so much time, so much money has been spent for that commission. I pray that if we, in our own lifetime, cannot come up with the reports of that constitution, of that commission, our children, if not our children, our grandchildren, should come up with them. But Mr. Pam, I think I will speak the minds of other people on this platform to say, look, thank you very much. You did a very, very good work talking to us this evening. I mean, if I said, perchance, let me come on today because the last time some governor came up here, I was very sad and I said, no, I wasn't going to come on this platform again. But you've actually changed my mind. You've made a lot of difference to my perception of this forum. Thank you very much.
Well, you are going to come and you are going to come again. And the issue of the forum is to get views of everybody. There's no bias there. So we need to hear what everybody has to say, and that's part of truth and reconciliation. And then take a bit of this and a bit of that and come to our own conclusions. We want Nigeria to heal. We want Nigeria to great again. And we must also try ourselves not to judge and be biased. So you will come and you'll come again, and we'll get you to speak also so that we can hear from you. Sonny, let me hear your question very quickly.
Thank you very much, Pastor. Gambo, is it good morning where you are or good evening? Nice to connect with you. How is my sister and the children? I hope they are all fine. Thank you very much for your very incisive presentation about this issue of peace is a necessary precursor for progress and development in any society. I want to speak and probably end it with a question. Starting from when the Oputa panel was done, that's about almost 20 years ago, a lot more atrocities have happened and continue to happen. And that also gave rise for the president asking all the various states to set up panels to hear police brutalities and injustices that have been done to various people across the country. We hear only of what is happening in Lagos. I don't know how many more other states are really have set up those panels and are working on it. Because across Nigeria is a catalog of woes and injustices for many people. Whether in the hands of your neighbor, you can't find justice, or it's in the hands of security agents, you still can't find justice. So there are a lot of people that have suffered needlessly, lost loved ones, and up to tomorrow, nobody is listening to them. Now, if we were to bring all these people together, like Pastor said, not even going back to 100 years, from independence, say from the last 60 years, and say all those that have suffered one injustice or the other, we want to be able to see, we recognize what has happened to you. What will you recommend the state does? Or what should the state do for them? Is it to issue an apology letter, acknowledge them, put them in a memorial? What will the state do to assuage this band of people? Because I can assure you they are almost in millions that have suffered one form of injustice or the other, either from the Nigerian state or from their neighbors, and they couldn't just get justice because of our flawed justice system. Let me leave it there so that others, I hope you got my question, and I will look forward to your response. Thank you very much, Pastor.
Thank you, Sonny. I can see you call him Gambo. It means that you must know him from Kaduna or somewhere like that. Or maybe you are in jobs together, I don't know. Okay.
I will leave him to tell you where we know each other.
At the beer drinking cup, Sonny.
No, Pastor.
Pastor Sam, please.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much for this opportunity. And Pastor Itwa, I really want to appreciate God for your life, for this wonderful platform that is enriching our mind and shifting our paradigms when it comes to the situation, the state of state in this country. And again, I want to also thank Mr. Pam for this exegesis. This is a great history that we do not have to forget. And just like the presenter said, it's quite unfortunate that the emerging generation, the emerging leaders they know little or nothing about this history. And it has been said that when history is not known, it's bound to be repeated. And I think this is one of the challenges that we are going through right now as a nation. that we have generations to generation being born without the knowledge of this history. So because this history is not known to them, we found out that this history is being repeated, from time to time. Excuse me, before I ask my question, I just want to give a narrative. Apart from between 1966 and 1976, I think it's about 11 or 12 years or thereabout. I know the Dimka's coup took a lot of lives also, a lot of innocent lives also. I think one that I know very well, because I was involved in a research about the involvement of the late the military governor of Benue Plateau. I'm talking about the late J.D. Gumwalk. And I spent about a month in the National Archive in Kaduna trying to access documents, trying to photocopy documents. And I remember it was in October in 2010, and there was a drama. I asked for classified documents that were supposed to be or to have been declassified at that time. And they said they were not going to give it to me. So I created a scene and I said I was going to call the press and I will go public about that. And then the DG came out and asked that I be given every document that I asked for. And just like Mr. Presenter said, there are so many things that I won't be able to talk about here that I got to find out in between the files of the late Northern Premier, of course, Sardona's memo. So many things happened. Now, J.D. Gumwalk, I got to find out, was very innocent. What I mean, innocent. And he was incriminated and shot on the drum, Now, these are also people who are hurting, just like the Pams and just like many millions Nigerians out there who are hurting about what is happening. My question is this, and it has always been my question. This platform is already creating for me what I see as a movement. How do we concretize and materialize the movement out of this that will create an advocacy group that will consistently and persistently over a period of time call for the implementation of several white papers, commissions of inquiries that have been set up by different states, fantastic recommendations. How do we create this kind of network across the 36 states of Nigeria for the implementation of this? Instead of going out all the time protesting for one thing or the other, sometimes our protests do not even make sense to me. But these are concrete reasons why we should come out. These are concrete reasons. Looking at this historical, exegesis, what can we do, sir? And this question goes to Pastor Itwa and Mr. Ibrahim Pam, the presenter. How do we create a network that will go out there from this platform to consistently ask for the implementation of this white papers and recommendation? Thank you very much.
Thank you, my brother. We definitely are working on it. And I'm sure you know that the movement has started. We can't have all this information and resource and put it in the archives like the Oputa panel report. We are going to work hard and we're working hard and we're looking for people who would like to join this effort on a sacrificial level in terms of what they can do, what they're willing to do, and also in terms of what they can give in terms of financial resource to make all these things happen. So if you are willing to be part of it, please let us discuss after. Mr. Anthony Ugbo, please.
Yes, good afternoon.
Yeah, how are you today?
Yeah, I'm good. Yourself? Yeah, good to everybody. So, Mr. Ibrahim Pam, you spoke very well. In fact, I happen to know your brother a little bit. He was in Congo campus. That's Yusuf Pam. He might have forgotten, but he was more or less my senior in ABU. And he was the first person I saw with a 12-string guitar. He was a good guitarist. So Project X, I hail you. Anyway, so you spoke very, very well and very much appreciated. And you see, like our country now, they stopped history, studying history from what I hear. The history is out of the schools. We have very serious endemic problems, which we all know. Mr. Sonny Enebi, more or less asked my question as to what needs to be done to bring Oputa panel out. But if I just say this, that it looks like our leadership, apart from the need to restructure, which I'm a very strong advocate for restructuring the country because it's not going to work this way. But the leadership, it's like a bad family, like a bad, when you have a bad dad in the house, there's always chaos in the house. And I grew up in the barracks, and there's some families where at least once a week they had a fight. So the point is, how this leadership that we have, it's not helping matters. And it's like a roller coaster from one bad leadership to another. One bad leadership to another. Because Nigerians are great people. Nigerians are extremely brilliant. I mean, I happen to be here in the United States, and it's a wonder what Nigerians are doing in America in all fields. But when you go back home where we're from, the leadership, like what you just spoke about, for people to come together and all that, when there are atrocities, nobody speaks up in the role of leadership to heal, to say, what is going on? It's all quiet, deafening silence. So that's compounding the combustion you see all over the place. Because when there's hurt in some area or some other area, the leadership, which is what, for example, the president, to be specific, needs to be seen more to speak to heal the people genuinely, not just once in a while, Garba Shehu, Femi Adesina. Not a single vote went to put Garba Shehu or Femi Adesina there. So the issue, the leadership is, I don't know if it's deliberate or not, but there's a serious deficiency there, a disconnect where we need to see our leader, and President Buhari has this great opportunity because he's like a father to the nation. But people are beginning to look and say, what is going on here, man? This is not adding up. So that is the key to the problems, because all these reports that are archived, how long does it take to take a genuine report like the Oputa panel report and bring it to the fore? Less people see it. Nigeria will be better for it. But there's so many forces in there that don't want good things to see the light of day in Nigeria. And it keeps going on and on, year after year. It's like we're being subjugated deliberately. So that's what I just got to say. So the reports are good. There's so many reports out there, so many things, so many good things in the country going on out there. But there's a serious disconnect, which I had always noticed since I was a teenager in Nigeria in the 70s. The disconnect between those in charge and the governed. It's like they were parallels. That's what you just got to say. So I appreciate your commentary and all that. I'm sorry about your dad. And Yusuf Pam, nice to see you again. It's been like since, 37 years now. But, have a nice day. I appreciate it. Source of the dead, rest in peace.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you, Anthony. Now, because you've mentioned his name and because he wants to ask a question, I will ask the 12-string one to speak as the elder brother. He was about 5 or 6 years old on that day in January. And the last time he was with me, he mentioned it in a very deep way. I don't know if he wants to say it today, but Yusuf, please go and speak. I'll just take your question and then we get Ibrahim to respond. Thank you. The 12-string one.
Thank you very much, Pastor. Thank you. Thank you for honoring the memory of the departed. Thank you for this program. You will never know how much impact it's making, but I guess history will vindicate you and vindicate those who are working with you on it. Let me thank my brother, Ibrahim Gambo, for this incredibly lucid and educating presentation. God bless you. Thank you. We're proud of you. I will be remiss if I don't complete the story that he started. Both Ibrahim and our mother worked with the Oputa Commission, like he said. But there was a profound event that happened during the time, which he hasn't spoken about, and I know it's because it's very private, but I will speak to it because it's important to complete the story. When the panel went to Enugu to continue its work, Colonel Anwuna, who was in the military then as well during the 66 coup, met with my mother Mrs. Elizabeth Pam, and informed her that Major or Captain Humphrey Chukwuka, whom Gambo had spoken about, who was like a member of the family and who led the team that abducted our father, was still alive at that time. And surprisingly to Colonel Aouna, she pleaded with him to please reach Captain Chukwuka and to arrange a meeting between them, because this was about 55 years on, thereabouts. And Colonel Aouna, surprised though, still went ahead, traced Captain Humphrey Chukwuka, and eventually brought him to Enugu to meet with our mother. She and Ibrahim subsequently narrated to us the encounter. She was grateful to God for giving her the opportunity to meet with him again. And they had a long time together, going back memory lane, talking about the events that happened. And she explained to him how all her children, from our eldest sister who was 8 to Gambo, who was 4 months old, were all doing very well. Indeed, Gambo was in Enugu, already a qualified lawyer working with the commission. And she gave him letting him no doubt that she had forgiven him a long time ago, together with all those who participated in the coup, and thank God for the opportunity to tell him herself. And she prayed with him, and she parted with him in peace. I understand Justice Oputa really wanted that story to be told. But because it was not a public story and it was not part of the work of the commission, but was a divine intervention at that time by God, she declined to make it public. Subsequently, the story came out and was told. We're grateful to God that she lived and we lived to see that moment. And for me, it exemplifies the possibilities of reconciliation and forgiveness, because God in his infinite mercy never closes the door. And no matter what has happened in the past, and no matter what experiences we've gone through as Nigerians, God will never close the door on us. It is left to us to reach out to one another, to reconcile, to make peace, and to forgive. My question, sir, is this. After the crisis in Plateau, in 2004, in 2005, in 2010, we made all kinds of efforts to have a bill for the unity and reconciliation of Plateau State to be passed by the House of Assembly, by the successive houses of assembly. None of them took that matter seriously. We understood the importance of reconciliation and forgiveness because the horrors that were perpetrated during the conflicts in Plateau, like you rightly said, when you looked from the ICC perspective, were still real with us. There were people who were walking around the streets and are still walking around the streets today, having killed others, having maimed others, having committed unspeakable atrocities. There are victims who are crying in pain, and yet everything was swept under the carpet, particularly by the political leaders, because they consistently opposed it. Now, my question is this. It's been several years after these crises in Plateau, 2001, 2008, 2010. Is it too late? Is it too late to still constitute such a body in order to bring victims and perpetrators together for some form of transitional justice and healing of the wounds that have been inflicted by these conflicts? Is it too late, or is it still possible?
Thank you very much, Yusuf. Thank you, Florian. Gambo, over to you. If you can, I hope you can remember those 5 comments and questions. And please just speak to them brief, so that we can take a couple more questions before we close.
Thank you, Pastor Ito. And indeed, thank you very much for all the questions. And to my big brother, Yusufu, much appreciated. He's always been my role model. But let me take the question. So Uncle Ayo asked a question about whether or not the Oputa panel was fashioned after the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa. Actually, this is a very important question because it addresses the essential constitutional character of the two. They're very different. What they did in South Africa was that the parliament passed what they call the Promotion of National Unity and Reconciliation Act, number 34, 1995. So that Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa was created by an act of parliament. What the act of parliament guarantees is that it has a constitutional legitimacy. And the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa had features that we didn't have in Oputa panel. And in fact, if you think about it, the very word Oputa panel indicates where we started from. We started as a panel, not a commission. It was supposed to be, I think, a 90-day panel to look at things that happened between 1994 and 1990. Until, like I said, this agitation to change it, and the president did change it. So if the Oputa panel had been set up by an act of parliament, by an act of the National Assembly, it would have had a much different legal character. And it would have been difficult to change it or to deny it the power to do the things that were done in South Africa. One of the elements of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa was it also had the power to grant amnesties. But the Oputa panel did not have that power. So the legal characterizations are different. The TRC in South Africa was much stronger, had more powers, etc. And I agree with you that indeed the report is still alive. If we can't do it, yes, our children should do it. Sonny Anebi, Pastor Ito, Sonny is a very dear friend and a brother. We have a history together that goes to our younger days when we were working in financial institutions in Lagos. But our history is not only working together, but we also played together. So it's great to see Sonny as well.
I could feel that play. Feel the play. Okay, man.
Ask me for more details.
I will.
Sonny has talked about the number of abuses that have occurred since then. And this is really true. And that's part of the plank of my argument, is that if you do not address mass violations of human rights, what you do is that you set the stage for repeat acts, either as vengeance for what has happened previously, or as opportunism because of the perceived lack of accountability. Once you start to hold people accountable and to redress the wrongs that have been done, there is a self-correction in the political space that ensures that people understand that there's no room for impunity, but also people understand that, you know, you have justice. Let me, sorry, I said I wouldn't take a lot of time, but going back to the petition of Bagauda Kalto, and I'll encourage you to read it in the report, what the family initially came to the panel to say was that all they wanted was an account of what had happened to Bagauda Kalto. That was their only demand. Initially, they didn't even ask for justice. They just said they wanted to know. And, you know, if you look at all of the panels and the truth commissions around the world, the search for truth is possibly the number one requirement by most victims. And then secondly is justice. But thirdly, reparation. So you're absolutely right that many more things have happened. And I think, and I don't establish any statistical correlations, but I think you would find that many of these acts of impunity take their legitimacy, so to speak, from the fact that other acts have not been occurred in the past. And your question about what should the state do to assuage people who have suffered injustice? Again, I read out a list of things, but General Gowon many years ago went to Asaba Bridge, and he spoke about his remorse for what had happened during the Civil War. I think it's fair to say that, that was well received. And he established a national prayer movement. Now, I certainly respect a resort to religion and to spiritual approaches, and even to moral campaigns. But I think we need to go beyond that. We need to go beyond that because it's not sufficient to say to someone, the Lord will heal your pain. Yes, indeed, the Lord will heal, but the state needs to do something beyond that. So moralizing campaigns and prayer campaigns have a place, but that's insufficient. It is a necessary condition, it's not adequate, and it's not sufficient. So we need to go beyond that to actually memorialize, to provide reparations where necessary, and to provide forms of justice. So retributive justice actually have criminal prosecutions, but social justice as well, create opportunities for people to recover. I'm very wary of time, but look, if you take the east of Nigeria, for example, you see that whole belt of Onisha, Aba, Newi. That could have been the industrial zone for Nigeria, much more than Oregon or anywhere else. If you look at Germany after the Second World War, Germany was nearly deindustrialized and they were nearly ruined completely. How did Germany come back? The area around the Rhine, what they call the Rhine Row, that became the engine room for the development of Germany. They built up their industrial capacity from there. If during the course of the Civil War, the Biafrans were producing Ogbunigwe rockets, these were projectiles that were delivered as missiles. If they developed the technology then, imagine what could have been done between 1970 and now if that area had received the kind of support and technological investments that it should have. Social justice is very important, and it also includes economic opportunities, etc. So I think there are many methods, but government needs to think clearly about what to do. Pastor Sam, I hear you, and I know that yes, history needs to be retold in our schools, and people need to understand. I leave the question of how we create a platform to Pastor Itwa, much more competent than I. My job is behind the desk, and maybe in due course it will be on the farm in front of a poultry. But I think Pastor Itwa has already established a platform and a network. There's certain people who are conveners, who are able to bring together people to create transformational change. And that's why we all gather here with Pastor Itwa, because he has that gifting and he has the privilege to be able to organize effectively. So I'm sure Pastor Itwa will take that up with you. And Engineer Gwebo, again, it's great to see you. And you're right, history has to be reintroduced in schools. Thank you for your comment. What can we do to bring Oputa panel to light? Exactly what I think we need to do is advocacy. We need to continue to seek more and more to force the hand of government and force the hand of the state. How do we do that? That's a matter for political engagement. By the way, the registration of, I think the registration of voters starts on the 28th of June. Political participation is absolutely critical. You cannot make change in a democracy without active participation and mobilization. People like Obama started out as mobilizers, grassroots mobilizers. And you've got to be able to engage the citizenry to understand the power of democracy and to utilize it to great benefit. So in many ways, advocacy, mobilization, etc., that can bring about change. And back to the question from my brother Yusufu, I think it's not too late to constitute a body such as this in Plateau State. Actually, I think it's a moral obligation to do so. These things do not have statutes of limitation. I think I was talking with my son earlier. We were doing a bit of a discussion ahead of this presentation. And thanks to my wife and my daughter as well, we were able to, they put me through a dry run just to be sure that I didn't slip up and embarrass them. But one of the things he asked me was, is there a statute of limitation on these things? And I said, no, there's no statute of limitation for murder. And I deferred to my very senior learned colleagues and judicial officers here, but I don't believe there's a statute of limitation on capital offenses. So for sure, there will be an opportunity to set up a panel like this in Plateau and in other states where we've had these issues. But it would take initiative and it would take political will.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Princess Pam said you passed with flying colors. So great. Thank you very much for those questions. I think there's Ishaku here. He also wants to make a comment. So I'm going to allow him. I guess is your elder brother also. And also take another question from Charles Odion Iyore and Galaxy A10, and we will close. It's been a long evening, but extremely, extremely informative, emotional in some bits, but most truthful. And it's really, really set a stage of what we really need to do in Nigeria and get our government to do it. I do hope that we'll be able to do so with some kind of encouragement and persuasion, and hope that they will listen. You know, there's so many building blocks that we need to build a great nation. How we continually ignore them, we're indifferent to them, and we treat them as though they're not important is what really baffles me a little bit. But let me not say it baffles me. I think I understand why that happens. And we'll try our best to correct it. So let me hear from you, Ishaku, also Odion and Gala. Ishaku, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Pastor. Thank you for arranging this series. I've been relatively new myself, but they're really illuminating. I also appreciate your co-hosts and all those who've attended. Now, Gambo is my younger brother, and I think there's been reference to the name Gambo. Just for those of you who do not know the nomenclature in the North, Gambo means Ido. So he comes after myself and my twin brother, but formally is Ibrahim. I just want to say that was a very brilliant and incisive overview of the topic about national reconciliation. You started off with human angle stories and weaved it eventually to a really lovely and deep conclusion. Now, I just want to recognize a professional colleague here because I'm going to stray into his area, and that is Dr. Femi Adebajo, who is here in the UK as well. And it's to say that actually our country is suffering from a collective post-traumatic disorder. I think we have to realize that this is what has happened to us, and it is on a massive scale. we've made reference to our family here, but the same story is replicated in hundreds and thousands and millions, in fact, if you consider the scale of the Civil War. And, having suffered it ourselves, I can assure you that it can be so deep-seated and repressed that it is not a stretch of the imagination by any means to say that it took us several decades before we could even begin to start removing the layers of the onion in talking about what happened to ourselves within ourselves, not even to begin to talk about it on a platform like this. I assure you that 20, 30 years ago, we are people in our late 50s now and 60s, but 30 years ago, we would not discuss this without breaking into tears. That is the extent of the trauma. Now, so we are talking about national reconciliation, looking at the past, but history is happening right now, is my feeling. And that the same thing that happened in the 60s, the same things are still happening now. And therefore, whilst it is a good thing to look back and try and reconcile based on what happened before, we also have to recognize that it is happening now. The same phases of genocide are taking place now. The demonization of individuals and peoples is taking place now. We have to, as a collective, stand up for each other. So when we talk about the genocide against the Igbos in the 60s, that is genocide part 1. Some might argue with you that part 2 has started. We have seen it happen, in other parts, maybe on a smaller scale. We've talked about the communities in the oil producing areas. But we have to also recognize that for as long as we continue to demonize big groups of people, tribes, we can never make progress. It will not be popular now for me to say it, but the same way that the Igbos were demonized in the 60s and killed is the same way that militants and South people were demonized in the North. It is the same way we're demonizing. It used to be Hausa Fulani, but people are now beginning to recognize the Fulani as a different group. That is the path to irreconcilable differences. We have to look at ourselves under the lens of a common humanity and to stand up for each group of people that are deprived and treated unjustly from wherever. And that is where the solution will start. And we need to go back and look at the basis on which we have been formed as a country, because structurally, constitutionally, there are major issues that need to be addressed. So I will not expound beyond that, but as a people, we need to look at our history, and even before we really work out the nuts and bolts of what happened, we have to recognize the injustices that happened before, even if it is with a broad brush. I would certainly want to see within our lifetime that the massacres that happened in the 60s, Asaba is a well-known one, but there were accounts that I know as a child of how people, even in my own little village, were hunted down and killed. Nobody has ever said any of those things. There are people alive who did those things. Is it too much to ask that some of those soldiers who were in the platoons or whatever, who did the shooting, could they not come out? Many of them are suffering. And we do know it affects people high and low. Even the generals amongst them do have mental health issues going back to what has happened. So I'll stop there. I'll say thank you. And Pastor, it's been a pleasure and a privilege to attend this. And I have learned as much as anybody else today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ishaku. God bless you. God bless your great family indeed. And God give all of us peace and comfort. My brother Charles, quick. we have really run out of time today, but and then quick, and then we'll get Gambo to close.
Can I go? Am I on now?
No.
Am I on?
1 second.
2 minutes. 1 second. I like that. First of all, I'd like to thank Mr. Pam for a brilliant presentation. Can you hear me?
My brother Charles.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
We've really run out of time today.
Can you hear me?
But it was worth it.
I can hear you. Yeah.
Yeah, can you hear me? All right. I want to say it was a very brilliant presentation by Mr. Pam, and I've also just heard from his brother.
1 second.
And what I take from them,
it was worth it.
There's confusion.
It was worth it.
Am I on or am I not on?
Mute yourself, Uncle Ephraim. Yeah, thank you.
Oga Ephraim. Now, so what I can always normally do at this time is to first of all give us a summary, because when Mr. Pam said, thank you for accepting him on this platform, Mr. Pam, Itwa set it up, but you are also a member of the platform. That you own the platform, and I like Itwa for saying that. Now for Itwa, there are things you have done that are beyond my wildest imagination. Because you spoke, Adevarasin spoke, and my brother got the president to speak. And so when I heard about the dots and such comments, I'm no longer angry. I'm actually sympathetic. In a civilized society, by now, Itwa and his team will be sitting with the presidency to think about the way forward and solutions. We are going to try as hard as we can, because we don't make friends with our friends, we must make friends with our enemies. And I suggest that Itwa, Mr. Pam, and El-Rufai, we can arrange it, should go and have a meeting with the presidency, so that we'll begin to determine for ourselves how we can determine our way forward. So Pam, thank you very much for what you have done. Okay, Ephraim, no vex, because I know that you have gone through a lot yourself. But I think that we are getting somewhere. Momentum has started. I now believe that this place will change before I die. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Don't die, because change is coming.
Anybody can die. Anybody can die. But at least what you've done is fantastic. I mean, but I'll get Jalal. Let them arrange for you. We're not asking for them to meet today. She'll actually call you. You, El-Rufai, Jalal, and one other person you call should talk to the presidency privately, not in our own view. Thank you.
We'll do that, and I think Jalal can arrange it. So I will.
Jalal should be able to arrange that.
Okay.
Okay.
Don't die, because change is coming.
Anybody can die.
Can I talk for 1 minute?
Let them arrange for you. They're not asking for them to meet. Like to tell you, El-Rufai, Jalal, and one other person. Thank you.
Right. I think Jalal can arrange it. So I will tell. God. Why is There's a delay. We need to close. Uncle Ephraim, yeah, thank you. You can speak now, briefly, please. There's a delay. We need to close. Uncle Ephraim, yeah, thank you.
Okay. I just want to thank Ibrahim for giving us the history of the war and the coup and so on. All of us were involved in it. I was in the war. I was an intelligence officer during the war. So we all knew what we went through. Being an Ijaw, we suffered, we knew what happened and so on. But I want to thank him immensely for the experience and what he has said, and how I wish our government, as if we have any government, to bring back history back to our classroom, because there is no more history in our country, which is why a lot of this young generation do not know what happened during the war, did not know what happened. I want to thank you for the history you brought in and all what you have said. People like you is what we need for the new generation to bring up our younger generation, our children, to take over from us, to rule this country. That's what we need if there's a country. You should be one of those who should prop them up with all the facts you have. I was involved in it. I was in the war in the eastern states. I'm from a Jaw minority man. We knew what we went through. So it's not something it's not it will not be good to see another war. Even if the country is going to break up, let's break up in peace. And things were not right. Put it that way. Things were really, really not right. But I'm always emotional when I want to talk about it. But God was in it. I was in detention right from after I was betrayed during the Biafran War, Nigerian War. I was betrayed myself by my friends. And then I was detained. Nigerian forces came into Port Harcourt during their recce as truck pusher, as madmen, and they released me from detention. After then, Nigeria now detained me again. Three Marine Commando detained me during the war, and I saw a lot of things that happened. So it's not something to write home about, that history should repeat itself. But believe you me, on this program, apart from the other lady who I commended, Ibrahim has been the best person on this program to give us a bit of the history of the war. So thank you so very much. I want to thank you, sir, for what you've done. Itwa, congratulations for bringing all of us together for this historic discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Uncle Ephraim. Thank you for your support and your encouragement. We will see how to make this thing have more gravitas than this and make it have impact. And all the useful suggestions, we'll see how we can make it happen. And Ibrahim, I agree with Uncle Ephraim that you should be part of the next line of leadership for Nigeria. I think what we really want to do is to make sure we get really competent leadership in Nigeria. If we had that, then all these things we're discussing and suggesting will be implemented, and we were able to deal with some of these, our gatekeepers who won't allow truth to come out. Ibrahim, let me just have your closing remarks. And my typical question is, what would you do if you were president of Nigeria? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Pastor Itwa. I think maybe I have a big mouth. When you're talking about leadership, honestly, I defer to the people I see on this platform who are extremely, extremely knowledgeable and competent. As I said, I will go back to poultry farm as soon as I get the opportunity. But let me start with Uncle Ephraim. I think, coming from you, that's really high praise. But I want to commend your service and the fact that you put your life on the line for your country. It's the greatest and the most noble thing that you could do. And I pay tribute to you and to people like you who have borne the scars of our nation on your body. God bless you, sir. So my brother Ishauku, thank you for your comments. I'm definitely going to have a haircut so that I don't look older than my older brother. But your comments are well taken. And you're right about genocide part 2. These things repeat. And that's what history teaches us. Unless we deal with them, we continue to have repetition. And it's never too late to deal with past injustice. And if you recall, a couple of weeks ago, Germany apologized to the people of Namibia, to the Herero, for the genocide. And by the way, that genocide was the first genocide of the 20th century, even before the Armenian genocide. But these things happen, and it takes a long time for them to come full circle and to be reckoned. And you see that in New Zealand, how the Prime Minister apologized to the indigenous people for taking away their children. It also happened in Australia in Parliament. Imagine how powerful it would be if we had the very top leadership in Nigeria the president and former president, the military officers of the time, actually take the time to invest in speaking to the people who were victims of some of these really grave injustices. Imagine when Chok launches the Asaba Memorial Project, if we have President Buhari there, President Obasanjo there, and General Babangida and General Abdul Salami, how much you can do just by putting yourself, and of course, General Gowon, by just being there and submitting yourself to this catharsis that we talk about. And, you know, there's hope, but you know, we have to watch our expectations. As I said, if they don't do it, the next generation will. And so the last question from Charles Odion, thank you for your comment. And as I said, there are people who are way in front of the line before it comes to me. I don't aspire to a leadership position. Pastor Itwa, I really have thought about this question that you always ask: if you were the president, what would you do? And I'm not inspired with an answer. And I think that's because I don't aspire to that position. I would probably be in a better position to advise the president from the comfort of my beautiful village Kwang on the plateau. I would welcome you to Kwang, by the way. It's a lovely little sleepy village on the plains of the plateau. And whatever advice that the president needs from a lowly poultry farmer, I'll be more than happy to provide. But thank you for the opportunity, and I'm most grateful to everyone for having taken the time to listen to me. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Ibrahim James Pam. Thank you for really opening our eyes. Ladies and gentlemen, we're almost 30 minutes over time this time around, so we really must close. I want to thank everyone who's made some really wonderful comments today. The comments have been brilliant, and it's added flavor and capacity to this discourse. And I really, really look forward to us deepening our conversation and taking it a little bit forward. I don't want to take any more of anybody's time. Let me just say, once again, Ibrahim, thank you. The Pam family, thank you very much. All those who made comments, thank you very, very much. And all those who have stayed the course, this almost 2.5 hours, I really appreciate you all. God bless you. Have a wonderful weekend. And see you same time next week, 5 o'clock next week, for another awesome time by God's grace. We will make Nigeria great again. We will speak to our leaders. We will bring out truth and reconciliation. We will bring out capacity. We will bring out a new generation of well-thinking Nigerians, and there will be peace and progress in Jesus' name. God bless you all. Wonderful.
Amen. Thank you so much for bringing this wonderful family, Pam family, to the venue today. Pastor Itwa, wonderful day it was. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Itwa, I'm going to call you tonight.
Okay. My sister, thank you. I'll expect your call. I'll expect your call. Thank you. Ibrahim, God bless you. Thank you very much.
God bless you, Pastor Itwa. It is well with you and your family and all that you have done. You will progress more and more.
Amen.
Amen.
God bless you. Good to see you.
Same here, my brother.
See you too.
God bless you too.
Thank you.
My Lord, my sister, thank you. I'll expect your call. Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor. I see my family there. Gambo, you do us proud.
Gambo, hi, my sister.
Saw you the last time. Thank you.
Good to see you. You're looking younger.
Where my sisters?
Hi, Pastor Itwa.
Tony, come for guitar lessons.
My brother.
My justice sister, where is she? I've seen her in a long time.
I see.
Hello, my Lord.
Gambus, go and cut your hair. You're looking older than me. Yo.
Yes. Where's Yao?
Yao, good to see you.
Yao Ibrokego.
Hey,
how are you?
The force behind the throne.
Yeah. How are you doing now?
Hi, sis. Looking good.
Well done. Well done. Thank you so much for this expose.
Say hi, Uncle.
Hi, Uncle Gumbo.
Yes. Where's Yao?